So we have the second part of Esther to look at tonight. We've been sharing in that story, that great story, and I really appreciated a lot of the comments you had last week, a lot of the thoughts that we talked about. Where did we leave off? Where did our story leave off last week?
Mordecai had learned of Haman's diabolical plan to have all the Jewish people killed, and he went to Esther. She was the queen, and he asked her to speak to the king, and so that he could intervene somehow. Esther was reluctant because apparently, unless the king asked for you to come to him, if you did, and he didn't want to see you, you would be killed. So she was afraid to do it, and he challenged her that sort of like, this is your moment, and you need to
seize the moment.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? It's one of these places where the story, you kind of notice it as you read through that the story kind of rhymes thematically. We started with a queen who the king wanted to come into his presence, and she refused. Now we have a queen who wants to come into the king's presence, but she can't. And so there's this sort of these sort of parallels that you see all through the story, and this is one of them that kind of carries the story along and connects things up, and so yeah, that's exactly right. Esther is challenged by Mordecai. Maybe this is your moment. I remember last week we had some differing opinions on Mordecai and what you think of Mordecai in this story. Differing is the wrong word, but we had various opinions about Mordecai and his role in this story. In this place, in this case, Mordecai becomes whatever you think about him prior to this. At this point, he becomes sort of the catalyst for the rest of the story, doesn't he? He's the one who says to Esther, "Look, maybe this is why God has you here." He doesn't say God, and again, Esther never mentions the word in the Hebrew version. God is not mentioned specifically, but God is sort of all through it, right? And this is one of those places. Who knows but what you have come to royal position for such a time as this? I mean, what does he mean there? Laura said last week, I think she texted and said that God places us in position to do His work. And I think that's what Mordecai means, right? That perhaps in all of these circumstances, some of which, as we talked about, are not pleasant circumstances to talk about, really. Not good for polite company, maybe. And yet, Mordecai is able to say, maybe this is a situation where God has placed you here just for this moment. What do you think about that idea? God has placed you here, or you've come to this position for just this moment. Does that give anybody any problems? Does anybody struggle with that a little bit?
I do.
Yeah.
I don't put it beyond God's. I don't take anything away from God in being able to do that or doing it. But I also think God allows people to do things and then can work in the situation.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean necessarily God was running the show throughout, because we get to some really troublesome thoughts if that's the case about what God wants to happen or not happen. And this story is included. I mean, one of the things you mentioned, Mordecai being the catalyst, which he certainly kind of persuades, encourages Esther. Of course, my immediate gut reaction would be, if I were Esther, I would say, well, you get in here and do it, like says you're telling me to put my life on the line here, but I know I'm not as good as Esther. But I mean, one of the things that I struggle with is, on one level, the Jews wouldn't be in this situation if it hadn't been Mordecai at the gate causing the problem in the first place. I'm not saying Haman was, everything's on Haman. I mean, Haman's arrogant, self-centered, willing to knock everybody down, everything wrong. So to me, that's part of the lesson here. But the reason he gets mad at the Jews is because he's mad that Mordecai won't do what he says. At least that's how I mean, I won't honor him. And so, I mean, the immediate situation is also partly caused by Mordecai that gets them into this in the first. Anyway, I don't know if you're hearing me or not.
Yeah, I heard most of that. You broke up a little bit there. I heard most of that. The other thing that strikes me about all this, what if the king had known that Esther was a Jew in the first place? And yet Mordecai had told her, don't tell anybody. So that sort of worries me a little bit, bothers me a little bit. But I think what you said to start with is good, Christy, and a helpful distinction. What you have in this story is people working their plans and doing their things and scheming and you've got a king who's got way too much power, and you've got a psychopathic advisor at his right hand, and you've got this guy Mordecai who's who we're kind of going, is he really the hero or not? You've got Esther, this young woman who, in a lot of ways, is probably, well, there's definitely in a situation not of her own making, and maybe even in over her head. So you've got all these things happening, and it's not that God is pulling strings saying, this is going to happen, so this happens necessarily. It's in the middle of this, God is at work. It's similar to what Paul talks about. In all things, God works for good. Not meaning everything's good, not meaning nothing is bad, nothing bad will happen to you if you are committed to doing God's will. But that in all those things that happen to us, that we do, that we're a part of, that we're affected by, and all of those things.
Hello.
God is at work. Yes, ma'am. Carlina. Hello? Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Also, people surprise us sometimes. And, somebody that we least expect, when they're put into a situation, they somehow perform better than you would have ever expected. Maybe they themselves would ever have expected. Like the president of Ukraine, his previous career was a comedian on a TV show where I think they said it was similar to the style of Benny Hill. And if you've ever watched Benny Hill, not exactly
Not highbrow.
somebody you'd want you to put in there as your president, but I think he has really risen to the occasion and inspired people by how he's reacted. Unlike the president of Afghanistan, who flew out of the country, probably taking a lot of money with him when his capital was taken over. So, people can rise to the occasion, and maybe they've got faith in God, or maybe somehow they've got faith in themselves, but somehow they're able to meet the situation in a way you might not have expected.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's really good. Really good. I've been thinking a lot of the parallels between, I mean, what you're seeing in Ukraine and the Jews' experience here in Persia. I mean, it's very similar, right? This sort of intention, this very intentional choice to, if not wipe the people out completely, certainly, diminish them and tyrannize them and terrorize them. And so, yeah, I think this, a lot of this to me really resonates. And yeah, and I think often that's the case. And Esther here, she's again, all of this has been out of her control. And now she's at this moment, like it or not, where she sort of has a decision to make. She sort of has a choice she has to make. And Mordecai, whatever his faults are, Mordecai says at this point in time, Esther, I don't know the answers. I don't know what to, but maybe this is, as you said, maybe this is the moment where you step up and make a difference. And it's interesting. He says, deliverance is going to come somewhere. There's some trust here. There's some trust in God's faithfulness, I think. Somewhere deliverance is going to come from God's people. Maybe you're it. And maybe that's what we need sometimes is something to help us see, what our place is in events and what our place is in the things that we do in our lives. Maybe we need that reminder that God is using you where you are. God is, I know I do sometimes, and probably you do too. Especially those times where we've all been where we're just not sure what we're doing, right? We're just not sure what's happening, and we're not sure what difference we're making, if any, and we're not even sure we're on the right track. Man, there's so many people that could do this better than me, and on and on we go, right? And maybe we need this reminder sometimes that the place we've come to is a place where God can use us. And we just have to be about, how that happens and how we make ourselves available for that.
And the fact is, I mean, even if you wanted to, and you might have wanted to, we don't know, Mordecai couldn't have done what us. He wasn't in the position.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's important to note, that it's not a matter of someone being willing to do the right thing, to make a stand. It's about the person who's in the right position being willing to make a stand. Because there have been times, and there are times going on right now, that there's someone who's been willing to stand up for something, but that person, but people who were in position to stop the thing didn't act, and God's will wasn't done.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important to note that, that Esther had both the power to act and the will to do it.
Yes.
So that's very
Yeah, she did have a unique opportunity, and I think that's what Mordecai is pointing to, right? You kind of are placed somewhere that nobody else is placed right now. Certainly, no other Jewish person is placed. You are in a position that nobody else is in, and maybe that helps too, to sometimes think of, where are the places in our lives where right now nobody else is doing this. Nobody else is utilizing this opportunity. Nobody else is stepping forward. Nobody else has the opportunity you have. And there are probably things in our lives where you'll find that you are specially placed for something, and you have an opportunity like few other people have at that moment, to help someone, to be with somebody, to take care of somebody, to encourage somebody, to serve, to sacrifice something. And yeah, so.
Patrick, I like the
Good.
fact that Mordecai put that out there, because we
Yeah.
all live in a world of two things, you know, either we're going to do something that pushes us towards doing God's will or pull us away from it. But I like the fact that when he was being influential and telling her to look at, maybe this is the time, that she didn't say, yeah, you're right, let me go. She shifted the conversation to, oh, get everybody to pray and fast for me then. And that's the faith that I hear. And like you said, this is the only place we can find too much about God is mentioning, but she just didn't take him at his word. And I think the lesson I'm taking for myself is when I'm saying, maybe this is why I'm here for this purpose, not to just dive in with both feet or the talents or the skills or my thoughts, but to pause and say, God, what would you have me to do? And I think that's what I see her doing, because she could have just taken his word and went for it, but she didn't.
Yeah. Well, and you know, maybe we make two different mistakes, right? On the one hand, it's, you know, I can't do anything. You know, leave me out. The other mistake is, you know, I've got to take it all on my shoulders. It's all about me. It's all about what I'm going to do. And I think very intentionally when Esther says, have everybody pray for me. You know, have everybody fast for me. Have everybody join in this as they can. She brings in other people, right? She doesn't want to do it alone. She doesn't want to feel like, I mean, she's got to walk in there alone, but she wants to feel like there are a lot of people behind her when she walks in there alone. And I think that's a really instructive thing, isn't it? That even the things that God calls us to do, he doesn't leave us solitary usually, right? There are usually people around us to help us. And maybe we're not good at helping or at letting people know, doing what Esther did, saying, hey, pray with me, help me in this, help me to make the right decision. And so, yeah, I think some really good ideas. And the other thing that I was just thinking of here, I mean, this all sounds really great, you know, who knows but what you've come to your position at for such a time as this. Could you certainly understand if Esther was saying instead, after everything else, now this, you know, after everything else I've had to go through, after everything else, I mean, again, you know, we think of this, the Sunday school lesson about it being a beauty contest, you know, and everybody's, you know, the girls are thrilled when they win. I don't think Esther felt like she won much, you know. And she, you know, so after this, after everything I've been through, now this is what's expected of me. I mean, you know, you can understand why she's struggling with it. But to her credit, she hears what Mordecai says, and she says, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I'll go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Again, I said pretty lightly, but I don't think she felt light about it. You know, this is a big decision that she's made. And yeah.
Take one comment.
Yeah.
You know, some people, they get their motivation from God, right? The Bible, you know, they go out and do great things. You know, Moses, this leader over in Ukraine, he's leading millions of people right now, right? He's inspiring people, because some people, like this fellow in Ukraine, is inspiring people. But I think Esther got her inspiration from Mordecai. He was her mentor, and she doesn't seem to be that strong of a Jewish person. She probably has some faith. I think she probably has some faith, but she doesn't seem like she's, you know, a person of great faith. So she's got to be getting her motivation from somewhere. You know, if it's not from God, then I think it's from Mordecai. He's inspiring her to take the courage to confront this king.
Well, I think maybe he did what a lot of us need from time to time, just a reminder. You have a place in this story. You know, God is using you. God has something for you where you are, and maybe we all need reminding of that sometimes. And maybe she had lost sight of that. Maybe, like I said, last week, she got to the place where she's at because she's pretty. Maybe she really doesn't think she brings much more to the table than that. And maybe, I'm speculating again, but
then you
if
make
she's had to, compromise some things about her Jewishness, I mean, you wonder if she even feels like God hears her and she has a place anymore.
That's another thing. Scholars will tell you that the reason God is probably not mentioned in here is because the Jews thought, because of what was going on with Haman and everything, that God had turned his face away from them. So it's like they're kind of ashamed of him. They're kind of hunkering down, and they're not talking about God, even though God is an undercurrent here in their lives. They're kind of putting them off, So I think it's a plausible explanation. God is not mentioned.
I think this story backpedals a little bit, or pulls back on the specific mentions of God, because God is all over this story. God is all, and I think a reader of faith, as you read through this story, you see that, you recognize God is all through this.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, and that's kind of the way our lives are sometimes, right? I mean, I don't always, I can't always be specific about how God is present, but I know he is. My faith tells me he is, and we see through circumstances, we see through the way things come together in our lives that he's there somewhere, and we can't always, figure out what he's doing, but he's there, just like he is in this story. And to me, that's one of the reasons the story resonates, because
Patrick,
it's a very real experience of God. Yes, Kristen.
could you explain what you mean by that you see God all through the story? I'm just curious what you're referring to.
Like these moments, like this moment, particularly, and the coincidences and the ways that that things turn around, and the symmetry with which they turn. One of the things that's really interesting to me is, as we get into the banquets, you remember these Esther's request of the king when he does welcome her into his presence is, come to a banquet. I wonder if she planned that, or if that was just kind of the first thing she could think of to say. She was backpedaling a little bit, I'm not sure. But come to a banquet. And so these banquets happen, these three banquets happen. And as the three banquets happen, the thing with Haman and Mordecai is playing out. And it comes down to, at the third banquet, when Esther reveals the plan, you have Haman now begging for his life from the young woman who is one of the people that he was trying to exterminate. That's an interesting turnaround. You have Haman. You have some other interesting things that we'll talk about.
Well, you mentioned coincidences, and one of them is yet to come, but like the coincidence, right, with Mordecai being at the gate.
Yeah.
And these two guards
Yeah.
are talking about assassinating the king, and he's able to prevent that. And then later on, which we haven't gotten to yet, the king couldn't sleep, and so he asked to have something read to him about things that had happened, and it mentioned this plot that had been overheard and foiled, and then, well, have I honored that person? And a coincidence? Well, again,
Yeah.
that seems to be God working.
And that's what I mean. Christy, I see God in this story, because as a person of faith, I think I'm supposed to see God in these circumstances, in these moments. And that's kind of the way life is for me. I often couldn't tell you this is what God's doing or God's behind this, but I certainly look at the events of my life and the situations that happen to me, and you can probably relate to this. that I see these circumstances sometimes not just as coincidence, but God is at work somehow. And that's a long way, a far cry from me saying, I know just how. And it's a long way from me saying that God is behind everything that happens in my life. I find a great parking place. Wow, thanks God. I'm not saying that. It's not a mechanical, it's not, I don't want it to sound too easy. But I do see God in those circumstances. And so I think when I read this story, I see God in those similar circumstances.
Let me,
Yeah.
to kind of piggyback off of that, I think that was a great question, Chrissy. I like the question because it got me thinking, how do I see God? Because I do see God in it too, like Patrick. And I think one of the things that stood out to me is God's chosen people, or the Jewish people, and that all of this is surrounding this whole thing of let's not annihilate God's people. We know from other books in the Bible, God had a plan for the Jewish people. This is a reason they were chosen. And so that, because it could have been any other woman, right? But this Jewish woman, this population of people that God has chosen to have his story kind of be out here in the universe. And that's what helps me. And I guess I'm done with that saying, and then something lighter. Every time I get a parking spot and I pray about it, I go, way to go, God. No.
That's fine. That's no problem.
Yeah. No. I'm just having fun.
Yeah.
But no, I do see God through the story. And I love that question because I go, how do I see that? And like Patrick, my faith makes me think that way about it. And something that Diana said as well. It's like, yeah.
And I don't mean that that in some way I'm special.
Well, I'm going to.
What?
I'm going to be a skeptic here.
Ron, you'll be a skeptic.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I think it's probably a really good thing that God isn't mentioned in this, because basically, are we basically saying God can approve of somebody saying, I think I'm going to become a really wealthy person's mistress because, I might be in a position down the road
Now,
when I could do some good stuff.
we've been saying for a week and a half,
Now,
Ron,
but look,
this
if
beyond
God, well, wait. Wait, Patrick, if God is there in part, you're getting into dangerous waters. If you say this is God's plan, because I don't think God really expects young Jewish women to agree to prostitute themselves and join a Persian king's harem. I don't really think that's an option that we want to throw out there as an unconventional way that maybe people can find themselves in a position where they can do good. And if you bring God in, wait, Patrick, wait, let me finish. I think if you bring God in part, you get into some really difficult things. I think a lot of this is Mordecai. I don't think actually Esther comes out of this thing as having much determinism on her own, except she agrees to do what Mordecai tells her to do. Esther comes out as a tool in this thing, doing what the men tell her. And I'm struggling a little bit. Everything works out, but let me tell you, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if Esther had botched up one of these dinners, do we have confidence that God nonetheless would have protected his people and brought about his plan? And I think the answer is yes. God would have still done what he thought was needed to be done. So I just don't think that because God used the tools that Mordecai and other people set up, I don't think that necessarily means we've got God through this, approving and the like here, so that we can hold Esther up and her actions as an unblemished example. This is a really weird situation.
So how can I count the ways that I disagree with you? nobody is saying that Esther's situation is what God wanted. In fact, I believe we have said
That it
otherwise.
was. Mhm.
I believe we have specifically said otherwise.
I don't know about that.
I don't think anybody's said that.
But if God's behind it, he's behind it.
Okay, I just read in the Christian Chronicle a report of a baptism in a church basement in the Ukraine while bombs were falling. So are we to say that God either wanted those bombs to fall so that person could be baptized, or God was nowhere near and had nothing to do with it? I don't think we have to say either one of those things. I think we can say God was at work, even in those circumstances. And they were not great circumstances, but God was at work in them. Now, I see something similar with Esther, and maybe I didn't communicate that as well as I could have, but I see something similar in Esther. I don't think we got to say it's either or. God is either all in, and so he's pulling the strings on everything that happens, or God is totally absent. If God's totally absent when bad things happen, man, that's a problem, I think. I don't think any of us believe.
But I think that's where free will comes in. We have the narrative of not so good things happening and good things perhaps happening, but God is over it all. He allows it. I think about the scripture when it says he causes it to rain on those that are his and those who aren't. So there's good and bad, but him being God can come in at any moment because ultimately he chooses when to step in and when to make the difference. And our choices are just that free will. And I think we have both going on at the same time, good and bad, something that he would be pleased with and something that he wouldn't be pleased with. And I think about the scripture that says, one will be in the house praying and the other will be on the roof. That there are always this conflicting thing that God allows us to have lived out in a present way, but he chooses when to step in and that his ultimate will takes place.
And I think that's kind of the way, that's the best all of us can do, right? That none of us are in ideal circumstances always. And so we're always, hoping and praying and banking on God being present and at work, even in those bad situations. Go ahead, May, I'm sorry.
I was just thinking about
Go ahead, that's right, go ahead.
when Ron said about Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, what he said, I don't know if he'll save us or not, but I know he can.
Right.
I don't know that he will, but I know that he's able to. And so I think that's how we have to look at, just like when I read your article about that person being baptized with the bomb, all I could think about, I was like, so, what, God's in the midst of that, because that person was able to be baptized with all of that chaos that's going on around them. Something was said to that person that made them want to be baptized. So God was in that. That's how I saw that.
And I think we can make a mistake two ways. The one is we have this simplistic view that everything that happens, God is pulling the trigger. And the other way we make the mistake, I think, is to say, God's nowhere to be found in any of this. And both of those are overly simplistic views. So, Alan, you want to say something?
I think that's the point about Esther. We don't know if she kept the law or any of the law. Mm-hmm. We don't know if Mordecai kept the law or any of the law. Evidently, they knew they were of Jewish descent. But that's the point. God can use and does use seriously flawed people. And we've seen that throughout all the people that God has used. We've been shown their serious limitations and faults. And that's a hope for us. If God can use seriously flawed people, that's me. Maybe I can be of some use to God.
Right.
And my point was not that God is absent. I just think the way it's written allows the reader as we've all done, to try to infer when God is present. And sometimes it allows maybe us to over-infer. And actually what really got me going was when we were talking about the Jews all praying for her. They must have been a remarkable group of Jews, because I can think if we asked somebody to pray for the mistress of an industrialist, I think a lot of us would be out right from the start. You know, why would I pray for that woman who's no better than she ought to be, who's gone basically into the harem of a foreign king, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And if we think,
last chance.
well, but I'm saying, if we sort of box ourselves in then, don't we? Because what they ended up doing was really, when you think about it, quite unusual. And I'm not sure that we would jump on, given some of the reactions I've seen in the United States to other powerful women who we just write off for you know, this offense or that offense or the other. And sexual impurity clearly would have been a big one. But anyway, that's,
So
there you go.
The banquets, we get to these banquets now, and we'll roll through a couple of these banquets before we get to the sort of the climax. Probably won't make that till next week, but that's okay. So it's interesting. Esther gets in to see the king, right? With all this trepidation, all this, and what does she ask? Would you and Haman come to a banquet tomorrow night? What do you think? Is she really clever, or is she stalling?
Well, she's absolutely stalling.
Josh says stalling.
I think she's very clever. I think
Yeah.
she knows that she knows she's been taught what works for this guy.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
playing up to him and throwing him a banquet is surely more likely than actually asking for something, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
She knew the way to a man's heart, she would have still.
You know, and it's interesting. She invites Haman too, right? I mean, I think this was a plan. I think she had this in her mind going in. This is what I'm going to do. She invites Haman with him to the banquet, and then they have the banquet. And by the way, the king is up to half my kingdom. Now that's an ancient Near Eastern exaggeration. He's not really going to give her half. She's not going to ask for it, but still, it's quite a magnanimous gesture the king makes, at least from his perspective. And so yeah, come to this banquet with Haman. Then I'll answer the question. Then Haman. These are like little gems of scenes now. Haman is thrilled, right? I get to go to a banquet with the king given by the queen. Man, I am right. I've got it. And goes strutting out and immediately sees Mordecai and is filled with rage. You know this type of person, right? And maybe we can be this type of person. Nothing is enough, right? and nothing is enough for him. He's filled with rage, even though he's been invited to this banquet. I mean, why should he care what Mordecai does? Mordecai is nobody at this point, right? Why does he care what Mordecai does? But it infuriates him to the point that he goes home and he calls together his friends and his wife, and he starts boasting. I know some people like this, by the way, who would call together all their acquaintances just to boast. So here's what's happening. I've got all this stuff. I've been honored, elevated above all the nobles and officials. I'm going to this banquet, but all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. I love that the wife kind of says, quit your complaining. Just take care of it. Put up a pole and impale him on it. That's what we do here in the Persian Empire. Put up a pole 70 feet high. That's excessive. and impale him on it. I think it's 70 feet, something like that. And then you have the scene that somebody mentioned. The king can't sleep, and he orders the book of the record of his reign to be brought in. And by the way, we're talking about God's presence. One of the interesting things about the Greek version of Esther is it makes these moments, it explicitly gives credit to God. And this is one of those moments. The Hebrew version says he couldn't sleep. The Greek version says God kept sleep from it. So anyway, just there's some little moments like that in the Greek version that you can tell they're sort of kind of doing what we're talking about here. They're sort of, trying to make explicit where God is at work. And he hears about this conspiracy. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? Nothing has been done. Haman comes in about that time. This is a bad day Haman's about to have. He's walked in at the worst possible moment, because what happens? Well, the king says, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And Haman naturally assumes that the king is talking about him, right? Well, here's what he should do. Have the king put one of his own robes on him, put the king on, put him on the king's horse, and then let one of the nobles of the kingdom walk the horse around and say, this is what's done for the man the king delights to honor. And the king says, that's a great idea. Go do that for Mordecai. I love these scenes where I mean, oh man, it's just delicious, isn't it? Just the irony is just perfect. So Mordecai has to go do this. And Mordecai rushes home after it's over, his head covered in grief. The covering of the head or the face becomes pretty important in the next few scenes. Tells his wife what's happened. His wife and his advisors say, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. I would like, Laura, if you're listening, I would like you to be more supportive if I ever have a bad day like this. Yeah. And this is one of those places, by the way, where I think, again, reading with some faith, we're supposed to see a reference to God. Mordecai is of Jewish origin. We talked about the preservation of God's people. Your downfall has started and there's no hope. You're done.
Yeah, I was looking at that for a minute and thinking, well, because the king didn't seem to care about Jewish people at all. He let Haman go through with this, he put out this edict to have all the Jewish people killed. So why would he come to ruin? I mean, the king doesn't care about Jewish people, but she's thinking, or his wife must be thinking, well, somebody powerful is helping.
This has gone south in a hurry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some editorial liberty taken here. Perhaps some words are being placed a little bit in their mouths because it sounds unusual for pagan people to be worried about the Jewish God.
I mean, isn't that unusual?
Yeah.
Throughout the
It's true.
Babylonian exile, throughout the
Comes up.
Persian exile, there are pagans over and over again who show at least some sort of respect for, if not admiration of Yahweh and of Jews, they understand that, there's power here and that they're doing something right, clearly. So we need to show some respect for that.
Yep, that's true. That's true. It's not unheard of, right? And I think this is one of those places where we're supposed to go. Of course. And this is where we see the story turn. And you come to this banquet where the king and Haman, they're there, they're drinking the wine with with Esther, and the king asks, "What's your petition?" And Esther says, "If I've found favor with you, if it pleases you, grant me my life and spare my people. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." Same words used in the decree. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify this serving the king. And King Xerxes says, "Who is he?" And Esther says, "Haman." And Haman chokes on his wine or whatever. And it just gets worse. Some days you just can't be an evil minion, because Haman is, the king storms out to go collect himself, I suppose, comes back in, and Haman is falling on the couch where Esther is reclining, begging for his life, but it looks like it's something else. And the king basically says, "Off with his head," right there. I mean, the decision is made. It says they covered, as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now, this means one of two things. Generally speaking, in ancient Near Eastern literature, when you talk about covering someone's face, it's done to a corpse. So it's possible that what happened is right there at the banquet, somebody happened to be standing there with a sword, ran Haman through, and that was the end of Haman. That's possible. It's also possible that it's something done for, condemned prisoners or whatever.
Or is it metaphorically, oh, he's already dead?
He's already dead, right. In any case, he has his pole set up for Mordecai, and he gets pulled on it, impaled on it instead, and the king's fury subsided. Whether he was executed by the pole or whether he was already dead and just put up there as a warning is left to the imagination. If you want to imagine that at all. I don't really. Boy, this turn of events, right? This reversal, and again, I come back to, I think we're supposed to see God in there somewhere. I don't know where, and I don't know what the circumstances look like, and I don't know, but if we were living through circumstances like this, wouldn't we say, boy, God's at work there somewhere? I think I would. Not that I know where, and not that I think of myself as the privileged person and the good guy who God is always going to save, but and not that we're saying that God is required to do anything, but I think often it's that uncertainty maybe that makes me look at events with hindsight and say, man, I gotta think God was there somewhere. And I have those events in my life, and I think you do too. And that's why I like this story, because it makes me think like that. It makes me think about those moments and recognize that God is present somewhere. So we will finish up Esther next week. Any last comments or thoughts that we can carry over to chapters 8 through 10?
Well, just not to prolong the point or anything, but you've commented about the story aspect of it, the setting up, the parallels. It's really a well-told story, vivid images, etc. I was doing a little mental exercise. What if this wasn't a story in the Bible? I'm not saying that we ignore that it is in the Bible, obviously, but it's, to me, if I don't assume God's making Mordecai be there or those kinds of things, I get out of it the bravery of Esther. And I think I just
No, I can hear you. I can hear you.
willing to ask everyone to pray and so forth. Okay. The bravery that she didn't know if she was going to live or die, and she served her people anyway. I'd like to think that it would
I think I lost you. Christy, I think you're muted.
I can't see that I'm even on, so I think it's like an interesting exercise to think about it. I'm not saying we continue on that way and don't put it back in the Bible. I just think that it's a little bit helpful for thinking about what someone who's maybe reading it as a story might take out of it, because there's still, even apart from the debate we've had tonight, I think there's some really interesting points. And I think, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's the willingness to go put your life on the line for in these circumstances that I take out of it most of all.
And you don't know what God's going to do, right? None of this should be read to say we know just what God's going to do. He's going to, reward brave behavior. He's going to reward courage. He's going to reward faith by, bringing us through safely to the other side. We don't know that, and that's what makes this a fantastic story, and why Esther deserves to be appreciated for the courage she shows and the faith she shows in this. And I do think she's the and Mordecai drives some things along, but I think Esther is really the pivot of the story, and she becomes vitally important. And as the story winds down, and we sometimes skip over the last part that we'll talk about next week, Esther becomes, I think, a very central part of the story. She already is. But we don't know. We do these things. We have these opportunities to make a difference and to do something that takes some courage to some degree, maybe not the kind Esther has, but some courage. And we don't know how God is going to use that. We can't say. And we can't say that we're going to come out, alive even, but we trust, and we believe in God, and we believe in His purposes, and we believe that maybe we're at this moment for just this time. And I think it's that ambiguity that makes this an interesting story, and one of the reasons I think that God isn't mentioned explicitly in the story, because we want to preserve that ambiguity. All right, we need to wind things down. Thanks for your thoughts, and good to see everybody.